Order!
O God, make your spirit and guidance be in us as we work for the benefit of all our people, for the peace and justice in our land, and for the constant recognition of the dignity and aspirations of those whom we serve. Amen.
Members, I ask that you please remain standing. Since we last met, His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, passed away. The Prince had a strong connection to Canada and visited the territories from Medevac in the north to Fort Smith in the south. The Prince even visited this very chamber. On behalf of the Assembly, I offer our condolences to Queen Elizabeth and the rest of the royal family. I ask that you please join me in a moment of silence in honoring of his passing. Thank you, colleagues. Please be seated. Members, I also wish to offer condolences on behalf of the Assembly to the families and friends of the Honourable David Cyril and Mr. Sonny MacDonald. Mr. Cyril was the first person to fill the role of Speaker of the Northwest Territories of the Legislative Assembly. A prominent lawyer, community leader, and a member of the Order of Canada. Mr. Cyril passed away on March 1st, 2021. Mr. MacDonald, an internationally recognized artist, was responsible for the loon carving that sits here beside me in the chamber. A recipient of the Order of the Northwest Territories and former chair of the N.W.T. Arts Council. Mr. MacDonald died on April 20th, 2021. His talent will be remembered both here in the chamber and in the homes of many Northerners. Our thoughts and prayers are with their families and friends. I would also like to acknowledge the resilience of the people of Jean Marie River, Fort Simpson, and other communities like Port Good Hope and Acknowledgements, who have faced or are facing flooding in their communities. Please know that the members of the Legislative Assembly recognize the challenges you are facing and are working to help you. Members, it is my pleasure to welcome you back today. It is an honor for us to be here on behalf of our constituents and all residents of the north of this territory. Colleagues, this will not be a long sitting, but the work to be done is important. The decisions you make in this House have important and lasting impacts on our constituents and all our people of this territory. I remind members to conduct themselves in keeping the rules of this Assembly. Show respect for one another, for this institution, and most importantly, for those who elected us. This is the place of the people, We are here to serve as their representatives, and we truly look forward to their return. It has not been the same without them here. I look forward to being able to welcome the public back into this building. However, the current COVID-19 situation does not allow it at this time. Although the Assembly remains closed to the public, media are welcome in the gallery. We continue to broadcast and live stream our proceedings. Our people need the opportunity to see and understand the work being done on their behalf. Colleagues, the days are growing longer and summer is just ahead of us. This is a beautiful time of year and we are blessed to live in this territory. I know that many of us and many of our residents have been fortunate enough to be able to get out on the land in recent weeks, and we are looking forward to the summer. To all members and all people of the territory, I want to remind you to be respectful and appreciate our land and resources. As we continue to take care of our territory, it will continue to take care of us. And now it is my duty to advise the House that I have received the following message from the Commissioner of the Northwest Territories. It reads, "Dear Mr. Speaker, I wish to advise that I recommend to the Legislative Assembly of the Northwest Territories the passage of Supplementary Appropriations Act Infrastructure Expenditures Number 1, 2021-2022, and Supplementary Appropriations Act Operation Expenditure Number 1, 2021-2022 during the second session of the 19th Assembly. Yours truly, Margaret M. Tom, Commissioner." Thank you, members. Orders of the day. Minister statements. Minister statements. Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to begin by welcoming all my colleagues back to the Chamber for this sitting of the 19th Legislative Assembly. I look forward to providing updates on key issues and mandate priorities, as well as hearing from regular members on issues important to residents over the course of the next 7 sitting days. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take some time to talk about community, about how that term has a renewed meaning not only with trying to address COVID-19, but also in the last few weeks due to the impacts of flooding in many regions in the Northwest Territories. It has been incredible to watch residents support one another during such a challenging time. Hundreds of residents have been impacted by the flooding. Some have lost everything, others facing significant repairs and efforts to replace possessions they lost. Some of what has been lost cannot be replaced. Mr. Speaker, no matter the challenges we're faced in the Northwest Territories, there is a sense of community that is special and unique to us alone. No matter the emergency we're faced with, a global pandemic, forest fires, or flooding, no one can take that sense of community away from us. Every single person in the Northwest Territories has been negatively impacted by this pandemic, and yet the community still came together to support others in need. During the early days of the flooding, residents, businesses, and organizations stepped up and volunteered their time and money to help those who were impacted by the floods. You opened your doors to your neighbors who needed a warm bed to sleep in since they couldn't sleep in their own. You donated airplanes full of groceries and hundreds of thousands of dollars to the United Way. Let us not forget the 2,500 pieces of Kentucky Fried Chicken as well, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, people came together to support those who needed it the most. Our government, Mr. Speaker, was there to provide support however it was needed. Local leadership on the ground, with the support of Municipal and Community Affairs, Emergency Management Organization, and volunteers, worked day and night to ensure that residents were safe and had what they needed. A multi-departmental effort helped to provide staff and supplies, including a temporary medical center to support the efforts on the ground. The responsibility for managing a community emergency rests with local governments, and when they made requests for additional support, we were there to ensure they were able to take care of their residents. And as recovery continues and the flood damage is assessed, I want residents to know that we will be there to support you in your recovery. Mr. Speaker, the Northwest Territories is vast, twice the size of Texas. Our 33 communities are spread out and in many instances separated by great distances. But when one community needs our support, the Northwest Territories stand strong with them. To everyone who contributed to the flood relief efforts, you are what makes the Northwest Territories such a special place to live. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, the strength and resilience of our communities and residents across the Northwest Territories shines brightly as we continue to address the COVID-19 pandemic. The response to the N.J. McPherson outbreak in Yellowknife is an example of over a year of work preparing for the possibility of such an event. Safety and preparedness have been our top priorities since the pandemic began, and the response to contain this outbreak is an example of the hard work of so many to protect residents and communities. The response of our healthcare and support professionals has been incredible. They have continued to go above and beyond to protect our residents and loved ones from the virus. I am extremely appreciative for their continued dedication to keeping our communities safe. As well, Mr. Speaker, the response of our whole community has been overwhelming. Everyone worked together to support one another and those self-isolating or tested positive. This community always comes together when times are challenging, and this has been no different. Because this outbreak impacted our youngest residents, the N.W.T worked diligently to secure doses of the Pfizer vaccine to begin administering to those aged 12 to 17. Our youth were some of the first in the country to get the vaccine, Mr. Speaker, a true testament of our efforts to protect as many residents as we can from COVID-19. Since the first case was confirmed, a tremendous amount of work has gone on behind the scenes to understand the extent of the spread and to contain it as quickly as possible. Because of this hard work, not only by our Chief Public Health Officer and her team, but by our incredible residents and businesses as well, we were able to prevent community transmission in Yellowknife and surrounding areas. However, it's important to put things in perspective. While we are encouraged to see residents getting vaccinated at a higher rate than most jurisdictions in Canada, we still have work to do, especially in some of our smaller communities. Mr. Speaker, getting vaccinated is the right thing to do. It protects yourself, your family, your neighbors, and those most vulnerable, including our children, and the important knowledge keepers in our communities, our elders. If we all do our part, we can begin to get back to the things we love, like community feasts, hand game tournaments, and traveling. Every person who gets vaccinated plays an important part in our effort to beat COVID-19, in our combined efforts to protect the health and well-being of our communities and our loved ones. Please get vaccinated. The Government of Canada has talked about a one-dose summer, where 75% of residents across Canada getting their first dose means things may start to return to normal. We all want that, Mr. Speaker, so let us keep doing our part. Mr. Speaker, the Government of the Northwest Territories is ready to turn its attention to the economic and social recovery of our great territory. The pandemic has brought into sharper focus the urgent need to act on social and economic development. Like every other jurisdiction, residents and businesses were asked to make great sacrifices to help protect the N.W.T from COVID-19. While we have largely escaped the worst of the health impacts, residents did suffer economic, financial, and social losses, and the government of the Northwest Territories is committed to helping the territory recover and come back stronger than before. The majority of our economic and social challenges are not new, though. Many of the efforts of the pandemic were a result of social and economic gaps and challenges that existed before the pandemic, and which the governments of the Northwest Territories, businesses, and communities were already working to address. Continuing that work and accelerating where it makes sense is going to be a key part of how the government of the Northwest Territories helps to promote recovery. Mr. Speaker, we're committed to working on the social and economic recovery of the Northwest Territories so we can emerge stronger, and we have been engaging with multiple sectors on a plan. We'll be tabling this plan later in this sitting, and we'll continue the discussion about how we will work together as a territory to promote recovery over the coming months and years. Mr. Speaker, the partnerships we have forged during this pandemic have shown us the importance of collaboration and community in a time of crisis. Our success depends on partnerships with all levels of government and working closely with all stakeholders. The support of Indigenous and municipal governments, residents, and businesses has kept the people of the N.W.T. largely safe from the waves of the virus that continues to affect other parts of the country and the world. Mr. Speaker, we are fortunate to have not experienced the same level of health impacts we see elsewhere. With the guidance of the Office of the Chief Public Health Officer, we have been able to keep many businesses open while still protecting N.W.T. residents. At the same time, we know that some areas of our economy have been particularly hard hit and that many residents have been suffering. As we have responded to the pandemic, residents, communities, and businesses have been very open in identifying the impacts and actions most needed to position ourselves to seize the opportunities that the post-pandemic expansion will offer. By working closely with stakeholders to implement our mandate and the Emerging Stronger plan, we have the opportunity to set the N.W.T. up to be in a position to thrive. This includes continuing to build on our strong relationship with the federal government. Mr. Speaker, Canada understands the impact the pandemic has had on the North. COVID-19 has laid bare the gaps in our society, and the federal budget released in April addresses several shared priorities and reflects that they are listening to what our needs are. Investments in housing, childcare, climate change, the green economy, and job creation are examples of their commitment to closing these gaps and ensuring a prosperous Northwest Territories for generations to come. Canada's commitment to ensuring people are not left behind as we move forward aligns with our own efforts to create a better future for our territory and its residents. Mr. Speaker, Canada is investing in areas that are important to our future and will benefit our efforts to meet the commitments outlined in our mandate. Mr. Speaker, in the federal budget, we were heard. Our government had identified a number of areas for potential funding, including infrastructure, housing, connectivity, health, post-secondary education, climate change, and early childhood education. Working closely with Canada and continuing to strengthen an already positive relationship will help support our goal of social and economic recovery. Mr. Speaker, I am optimistic that we share common goals between our governments, and I look forward to learning more about how we will benefit from the commitments made by Canada in the coming months. We have faced one of the most difficult challenges our society has faced in the last century. It has not been easy, but I am confident that in the coming months, by working together, that we will begin to emerge from the pandemic and return to the things that we love. Since the beginning of the pandemic, the government of the Northwest Territories has been committed to protecting the health and well-being of residents, and to this point, we have been successful. Mr. Speaker, we are also committed to ensuring a social and economic recovery that will make the Northwest Territories stronger and support the success of residents now and into the future. If we have learned anything in this pandemic, it is the importance of strong and collaborative relationships built on mutual respect, trust, and understanding. We have learned the sense of community. Mr. Speaker, as we go forward, we will continue to work with Indigenous leaders, community governments, the federal government, stakeholder groups, the business community, and residents to ensure a holistic approach to our collective efforts to emerge from this pandemic a stronger Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Premier. Minister statements, member statements, member for Hay-River South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the potential for spring flooding for communities situated along our rivers is a reality. For the community of Hay River, it is an annual event that must be prepared for. Mr. Speaker, today I would like to recognize and thank the Town of Hay River, Mayor and Council, staff, along with the Hay River Community Emergency Management Committee and volunteers for the great work they did to plan, coordinate, and carry out activities to respond to potential spring flooding. The committee, under the supervision of Ross Potter, Director of Protective Services, makes the whole process appear effortless. However, we all know that it is not as easy as that. And for that, I commend Ross and his team for their dedication and the hard work they do to keep the residents safe while protecting property and keeping us informed. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to recognize and acknowledge the residents of Vail Island for the preparation each made in the event evacuation was required. And this year, a temporary evacuation was required, which I am pleased to say went smoothly. It is always difficult to leave your home not knowing whether or not you will have a home to come back to. The residents of Vail Island looked to friends, relatives, and businesses for support, whether it was for temporary shelter, a place to set up an RV, or somewhere to drop their pets while they manage the stress of the situation. Mr. Speaker, it takes a compassionate and well-organized community working together to ensure the safety of those that may be affected by any potential disaster. Hay River has proven time and time again it is that community. And for that, I again applaud the residents, businesses, town employees, volunteers, mayor and council, and all who work to keep us informed and safe throughout the spring breakup. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Hay-River South. Member statements, member for Inuvik-Twin Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In a previous member statement, I stated that housing is a basic necessity that everyone needs, especially here in the north where the temperatures swing dramatically, and at home right now currently it's snowing. Mr. Speaker, I raised the issue on October 28, 2020 regarding the struggles that the Inuvik Emergency Warming Shelters was having. At that time, the minister stated her department was working on a homelessness strategy, but the draft was still not complete. Mr. Speaker, the minister also committed to sending in staff to assist with the operations and staff support. I know this happened, but from what I know that they came and they left back to Yellowknife. The Inuvik Warming Shelter continues to have its struggles to the point where the board closed the shelter again in mid-May. Mr. Speaker, before the COVID pandemic, the shelter did normally close in the summer to overnight shelter, except for last year due to COVID. And Mr. Speaker, I don't know why the N.W.T is not supporting the Emergency Warming Shelter Board and staff this summer, as we have not moved out of Phase 2 and of the Emerging Wisely Plan. At this point, it feels like we're going to be in this phase for eternity. Mr. Speaker, you know as well as I, the nights in Inuvik continue to get below -0. Where are they supposed to stay? Last year, the town passed a bylaw about no loitering, no urinating on public streets in Inuvik. So now with the facility closed down for the summer, where are we, we're forcing them to break the law. Where are they supposed to use the washroom when there are no public washrooms available? Where can they get a meal and something to drink? It's time the minister who is responsible for homelessness, who is also the Minister of Housing, work with the Minister of Health and Social Services, step up and begin a long-term plan for housing and really, truly assisting our residents with addictions and providing a place to sleep 365 days a year. Mr. Speaker, it is vital to have dedicated staff to support and fund these NGOs and volunteer boards that are doing the work in each community that has a shelter. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will have questions for the Minister responsible for homelessness.
Thank you, Member for Inuvik-Twin Lakes. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Thabatcha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have made several statements in this House about the affirmative action policy and how it is not working as it should to help Indigenous people be employed by the government of the Northwest Territories. Lately, however, I've realized the issues within the Human Resources Department go much deeper than just the affirmative action policy. I'm seeing now that there are several structural issues around hiring in general that is impeding all people from attaining employment with the government of the Northwest Territories. Mr. Speaker, last week I heard from many constituents with concerns around employment hiring within the government of the Northwest Territories. It seems more and more that barriers are being put in place not only for Priority 1 individuals, but for all applicants to the government of the Northwest Territories positions. For example, two people spoke about two different issues and both situations were identical. The government put out a job description, the constituents applied, some time passed and the job was suddenly cancelled. The person called Human Resources was told no one with proper qualifications had applied. Thus, the competition was cancelled. Then a new job was reposted with identical descriptions and qualifications. I believe this was done to indirectly screen them out of competition in order to avoid screening them out officially on the record. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I attended a public meeting last week on the Special Committee on Reconciliation and Indigenous Affairs. There was something said by a guest speaker which resonated with me. The speaker was a Métis lawyer who teaches law at the University of Manitoba named Professor Brenda Gunn. She said, government employees need training and clear direction from ministers, deputy ministers, and assistant deputy ministers. Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to conclude my statement.
Thank you, Member for Thabatcha. The member seeking unanimous consent to conclude her statement. Are there any nays? There are no nays. You may conclude your statement.
Mr. Speaker, that quote appealed to me because I don't think that our government has done enough of that when it comes to addressing the various hiring issues within human resources in the government of the Northwest Territories. Direct intervention by the Minister of Human Resources is necessary. Continuously, friends will take care of friends, families hire their families, and they protect each other from any potential repercussions because of it. There are many people who want to better themselves and to seek employment by the government of the Northwest Territories. But if there's no room to get their foot in the door, and if there are gatekeepers protecting an exclusive club, then very few will ever get ahead, let alone get hired. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I strongly believe that a renewal strategy needs to be implemented within the entire Human Resources Department of the Government of the Northwest Territories. Structural changes must be done to address the hiring practices, the hiring culture, and potential off-the-book decisions that are made adversely affect applicants. I will have questions for the Minister of Human Resources later today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Thabatcha. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In recent years, northern tourism and the economy have been challenged by disasters like forest fires, the pandemic, and now flooding, causing this fledgling economic sector to become virtually non-existent. Through no fault of their own, our tourism operators require even more support than they ever have before. Despite recent news that N.W.T lodges are allowed to bring visitors from southern Canada, this is not enough for our suffering tourism and hospitality sector. Many businesses do not have the means or capacity to adjust their business models to meet new safety requirements or aren't willing or able to take on the additional risks. With the possibility of additional supports in the coming weeks, we must continue to work closely with partners like N.W.T Tourism, the Chambers of Commerce, and the business sector. Open dialogue with stakeholders and really listening to them is key to understanding the ongoing challenges, not just in regards to COVID impacts, but with respect to the flooding and other natural disasters, as well as skyrocketing building costs. From 2019 to 20, there was a decrease of 5 tourism operator licenses, or TOLs. Last year, the greatest declines were in the Beaufort Delta due to the loss of cruise ship tourism as a result of the restrictions on travel. If all TOLs are approved this year, there will be a total of 152 licenses in place for 2021, a decrease of 2 from last year. However, many will likely not operate. While this is the second year in which the N.W.T has waived TOL fees, I don't believe this is enough. Fees will be waived for tourism operators who are not able to operate. However, some operators will continue to operate at a reduced capacity and will need support as well. How many will close if more assistance isn't available? What further supports will be provided during the post-pandemic recovery efforts in order to rebuild a successful and profitable tourism sector? Relief programs from last season that have already been proven to help need to continue. As well, additional training and courses should be provided to help operators build their credentials, qualifications, and skills. These could include courses on plumbing, painting, or carpentry, as well as natural disaster and emergency response training. Courses that have further benefit of helping people to maintain their own residences. Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to conclude my statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave. The member is seeking unanimous consent to conclude her statement. Are there any nays? If there are no nays, you may conclude your statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I didn't just try to rush it in this time. Oh, shoot. Okay, well, modern technology here. My apologies, Mr. Speaker. Oh, geez. Sorry. I don't have it memorized. I apologize. Okay, it's all the security. So Aurora College could offer courses part-time or virtually so that small business people and their staff can attend when it works for them. Safety training could cover areas like fire suppression and disaster training, including how to set up sprinkler systems, mitigate floods and fuel spills, and responding to other events that often occur as the result of our harsher and changing climate. All these workshops, short courses, and online training could also become tax deductible. The more we can help our small business sector and operators to survive the pandemic, the better situated we'll be to recover. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Kamloops.
Mr. Speaker, the reality of housing in the North is dire. N.W.T housing problems are well above the national average, while funding for housing has decreased both federally and territorially. We have heard multiple times that GMWT cannot solve the N.W.T's housing problem alone, and that the key to northern housing success is partnership. To foster these partnerships, our government needs to first create space for them. Mr. Speaker, the GNWT's policies and regulations need to harmonize to support the priorities of the people of the Northwest Territories. But instead, we have multiple policies that work against improving housing for Northerners. Education, culture, and employment's income assistance policies play a key role in addressing the housing challenges faced by N.W.T communities. The income assistance accommodation allowance is the territory-wide benefit used to access housing. If this benefit could easily be used to support key strategic partnerships with Indigenous governments and non-government organizations, it would offer long-term solutions to northern housing. As it currently stands, this policy creates persistent barriers that require people to add their names to the public housing waitlist to receive the rental allowance and restricts people from accessing other forms of housing as an end goal. Today, the end goal seems to be a reliance on public housing.
There is not enough public housing to serve the 900-person wait list, and the Housing Corporation lacks the strategic plan to transition people from public housing or to address its quantity and quality housing stock. This policy also excludes potential partners like the private sector, nonprofit, or Indigenous housing providers to help house Northerners with permanent solutions to end homelessness. This income assistance policy requires clients to pay for housing and utility arrears, creating another barrier to accessing the housing allowance. These arrears can take years to pay, and the policies that drive them do not reflect property damages caused by an abusive partner or arrears from rent increases caused by family members sleeping on the couch because they cannot pay their own arrears or rent. Housing is a human right, Mr. Speaker. Partnerships with Indigenous governments and non-government organizations play a pivotal role in our future housing success, but rely on this government to create space for solutions to our housing crisis with forward-thinking policy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Kamloops. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Detroit.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Northwest Territories Housing Corporation is dictating to the communities as to the types of new housing to be built in their community. Mr. Speaker, it's as if the Housing Corporation has free rein in the communities and decides where in the community they will build. Typically, back in the good old days, anyone or any organization wanting to conduct any type of business or new builds in the community would consult with the various leadership organizations of their intentions. Mr. Speaker, this is meaningful consultation, and any time this path is taken, it leads to a happy, satisfied community. Back in 2018, the Northwest Territories Housing Corporation built 2 duplexes in Fort Providence. Both of the duplexes are approximately 6 to 8 feet high off the ground. This type of construction you would find in the Arctic regions. In the Arctic regions, they deal with 8 to 10 foot high snowdrifts. Mr. Speaker, there was no consultation with the Fort Providence Local Housing Association nor the community leadership as to the type and style of housing that would be built at the time. I believe there is a similar situation in Fort Resolution. The federal government recently provided significant infrastructure investments in building much-needed housing units for the small communities. Mr. Speaker, sadly, there weren't any consultations with the community, and especially the local housing association staff and board of directors. I myself feel slighted as I was not kept in the loop as to any decisions made by the N.W.T. Housing Corporation in terms of the types of units going into my community. Mr. Speaker, I will have questions for the Housing Minister at the appropriate time. Merci.
Thank you, Member for Detroit. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Framley.
Monsieur le Président, an interesting study was recently released summarizing extensive soil sampling for arsenic covering much of the Slave Geological Province, including the Yellowknife area. Thanks to local resident Mike Palmer, who worked with Queen's University professor Heather Jameson for this work. Using a combination of mineralogical analysis and statistical and geospatial analysis, they showed conclusively that in soils around Yellowknife and up to 20 kilometers away, most of the arsenic came from mining. Arsenic contamination persists even after more than 60 years after most of it was released from gold roasting operations. There is some evidence of arsenic slowly dissipating, but it will be with us for many years, if not forever. Background levels of arsenic in the Slave Geological Province were found to be in the range of 0.25 to 15 parts per million, and as high as 30 parts per million for the type of rock around Yellowknife, comparable to findings everywhere else on the planet. Some of you are asking, so what? Some previous work had claimed that the natural background levels of arsenic and rock around Yellowknife were much higher, 150 parts per million, or 5 to 10 times what this new and much more thorough study shows. That the old work that was done by consultants and a group called the Yellowknife Arsenic Soil Remediation Committee in the early 2000s. In 2003, N.W.T set arsenic remediation guidelines for soil at 160 parts per million for residential use and 340 parts per million for industrial use. I objected to those guidelines and believe that they were too high and not protective enough. The nationally accepted standard was, and still is, 12 parts per million. I received numerous assurances that the 2003 arsenic remediation standards would be reviewed. I'm still waiting, and this new study that shows the background levels should be no more than 30 parts per million rather than the 150 parts per million as previously claimed. There's even a stronger case now to review these outdated remediation guidelines. I'll have questions later today for the Minister of Environment and Natural Resources on what the plans are for reviewing the 2003 arsenic remediation guidelines, the implications for current remediation work at Giant, and for property owners in this city. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been over 6 months since the Business Advisory Council disbanded and said that it didn't have faith that economic recovery was a priority for this cabinet. And here we are, Mr. Speaker, still without our Emerge Stronger economic recovery plan, and it's hard to have faith, Mr. Speaker. Before the Business Advisory Council disbanded, they conducted an all-day strategic planning session where they made a number of recommendations on what we could do, Mr. Speaker. As far as I can tell, Mr. Speaker, those recommendations have largely been ignored. I once again, in this sitting, will go through some of those recommendations. First, offer a rebate program to N.W.T residents for staycations. Mr. Speaker, I love this program. In Nova Scotia, if you go on a staycation, you got 20% back. I think this should be the main vehicle for encouraging tourism within our territory. Yet we decided not to do that. We decided to ignore the advice of our business community. Mr. Speaker, they advised that the G&WT should develop infrastructure to support electric vehicles. Mr. Speaker, the G&WT does not own one single electric vehicle station. Despite having 900 vehicles and spending $3 million a year, we don't own one single electric vehicle. Mr. Speaker, they asked that we organize an online festival and show of N.W.T artisans of their work, as well as set up an e-commerce site for artisans. Mr. Speaker, multiple governments and organizations for years have asked for N.W.T Arts to set up an e-commerce platform for N.W.T artists, and we ignored this recommendation from the Business Advisory Council. They said we should reduce fees and alcohol taxes for industry businesses. We're definitely not going to do that, Mr. Speaker. They said we should consider specific support for the hospitality industry, Mr. Speaker. I've yet to see that report. Mr. Speaker, they asked that we under declare a state of emergency, amend BIP to remove the limitation and create a benchmark. We have not done that, Mr. Speaker. In the Yukon, 15% of government contracts have to go to Indigenous businesses. There is a clear benchmark and a target they have reached. We still do not have an Indigenous procurement policy. Mr. Speaker, there were many other recommendations from our Business Advisory Council, and as far as I can tell, they are not in our plan and we don't have a plan. I will have questions for the Premier on where Emerging Stronger is at.
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife North. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Mumphrey.
JJ, respect your elder. Mr. Speaker. Next, Mr. Speaker, the Clinton.
Mr. Speaker, about for Clinton region, there'll be an election coming up very soon. The closing date for the candidates for Clinton region has closed May 17, and there is a few people that's running right now. And for the Clinton region, for the 4 communities, there'll be an election, and for the chief and the council as well. For Bichoko, there's 5 candidates for the chief for Bichoko alone, and there's 31 candidates for the consuls. And for YELLOWKNIFE, there's 3 people that's running for the chief, and there's about 15 that is running for the consul. And for N.W.T, there's 2 candidates for the chief and 12 candidates for the consulars. And for YELLOWKNIFE, there's 2 candidates for the chief. They don't have enough candidates for the consul, so now they had added a few more days. So today, Mr. Speaker, there's so much is happening in Clinton region, and there's also lots of activities because of people are also campaigning, and so we are hoping, or I am hoping, it would be turn out very well for all the candidates. That's a lot. So I like to say good luck to all the candidates. And so through this, I just like to give all my good luck to the candidates. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Member for Mumpuy. Member statements. Member for N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I rise in recently deceased residents in N.W.T, and I'd like to give our thoughts and prayers to them. Marcus Rubin, elder from Paultuck, born March 19, 1933, passed away May 2nd, 2021. He had with his beloved wife, they had 9 children. He was 10th born of 13 to Reuben Angik and Sadie Suliak, and he'll be sadly missed in the community. And Arlen, his family, thoughts and prayers are with them. Nellie Pokiak of Tuktoyaktuk, deceased April 28, 2021, survived by her beloved husband Frank Pokiak and his children Beatrice, Verna, Shaley, his son Warren, her son Warren, and her sister Julia Cockney. Baby girl Carly Alvera Tudjuk from Tuktoyaktuk, deceased April 2021, survived by her beloved parents Raymond Cockney and Susanna Tudjuk, and her brothers and sisters. Annie Gruben of Tuktoyaktuk, deceased May 6, 2021, survived by her beloved husband Sammy Gruben, son Sammy Jr., Randy and Richard Gruben, daughters Janice LaValle, Tanis Blake, Terry and Jamie Gruben, her brothers Roger, Raymond Atagiak, and her sisters Sarah and Catherine, and Laura and Agnes. Jean Kagiuk, deceased April 21, elder from Ulakakto, survived by her beloved daughters Annie and Laura Inuktalik, and Marlene and Margaret Kagiuk. Mary Kagiuk, deceased March 31st, 2021, originally from Ulakakto, survived by her beloved daughters Alexis and Margaret of Ulakaktuk. Robert Anikina, deceased May 25th, 21, from Tuktoyaktuk, survived by his beloved brothers Miles, Norman, Opie, Matthew, his sisters Clara, Rhoda, Maureen, and Lily. And for all the families, may the good Lord give you comfort and peace during our difficult times ahead. Thoughts and prayers to everyone across our territories who lost loved ones since our last sitting. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for N.W.T. Our thoughts and prayers are with the family and community at this time. Member statements. Member for Nahende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mary Nally was born on March 22, 1934, at a traditional Denny camp at Fish Lake near Wrigley, Northwest Territories. She passed away on March 30, 2021. Mary was 86 years old. Mary and her late husband, Edward, had 9 children together. They adopted Camellia later in their lives. She had 16 grandchildren and 12 great-grandchildren. Mary had unconditional love for all her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. She was caring, passionate, loving, good-spirited, patient, great teacher, and an outstanding person, and had a beautiful soul. Mary had great respect for the land and knew about the traditional medicines from the land. She liked walking around outdoors and always said that it was so beautiful outside on the land. She often sat outside her house in Wrigley on the stairs in the summertime with a cup of tea and enjoying the warm sunny days with birds singing and the squirrels making noise nearby. Mary had many friends everywhere she went and even traveled to Montana, USA once with her best friend, Ethel Wilmot, for her Sundance ceremony. Mary was very talented in making traditional Denny handcrafts. She has made numerous beaded moose-hide moccasins, gloves, mucklucks, vests, jackets, wraparounds, picture frames, and a few other crafts for her children, great-grandchildren, and many other friends and people who knew of her special talents. She attended handicraft events and sold many items. Mary liked George Jones and Hank Wilman, country western music, and I have to agree with those amazing artists. Mary left a great deal for others to follow in the knowledge of the Denny traditional way. Mary will be greatly missed and will be remembered by her family, great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, friends, and many people who knew her. She left us with priceless memories, which we will cherish in our hearts. We will sadly miss her. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Nahende. Our thoughts and prayers are with the family and community at this time. Member statements. Member statements. Returns to oral questions. Returns to oral questions. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have a return to oral question asked by the member for N.W.T on March 31st, 2021 regarding Medevac services. The air ambulance service provider has been contracted to provide coverage for the entire Northwest Territories. The contract requirements include dedicated services such as aircraft crew, and air medical crew, available 24 hours a day, 365 days a year to meet the demand of air ambulance transport requests. To achieve this, in accordance with the performance requirements in the contract, the air ambulance provider has bases in Yellowknife and Inuvik. They provide a combination of medical crew and aircraft crew and 3 dedicated Yellowknife-based planes and 1 dedicated Inuvik-based plane to meet the demand of both in-territory and out-of-territory patient transports. At this time, the current combination of planes and crew has met both response time and service level benchmarks within the contract, and there is no need to consider exploring additional resources for the Inuvik base. Simply expanding the number of planes available at the Inuvik base will not directly increase capacity to move patients across the N.W.T. because of the complexity of matching and dispatching resources such as aircraft crew, and medical crew to the air ambulance transport needs. As an additional patient safety support, there is a contingency plan for additional resources that can be activated immediately to ensure critical transports are fulfilled as and when needed. The Department of Health and Social Services and the Northwest Territories Health and Social Services Authority will continue to monitor the service level standards and response times against the contract. They commit to reviewing the contract requirements upon issuing a new contract or current contract extension to ensure all communities across the N.W.T continue to have appropriate access to emergency air ambulance services. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Returns to oral questions. Returns to oral questions. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Acknowledgements. Acknowledgements. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for River South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the flooding this year has appeared to have not only caught communities off guard, but this government as well. It was the people of the N.W.T that stepped up and provided immediate support to the flooding victims, and we must recognize and thank them for taking on that responsibility. It is now time to show compassion and to refocus our priorities and look after those that cannot return to their homes or businesses. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I would ask the Minister of MACA to confirm what resources and support her department is providing to ensure those families in Jean Marie, Fort Simpson and Fort Good Hope have temporary accommodation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Haverhill South. Minister responsible for Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Housing Corporation and MACA have traveled together into the affected communities right now. We're looking at Jean Marie and Fort Simpson. Waiting to get back the affected number of houses that have been impacted. The last conversation I did have with the Mayor that there was 20 to 30 homes that were affected, and then I got another update that there was 10 homes that were affected and then 6. So I need the department to return back to Yellowknife so I could further look at that assessment that we are doing internally and looking at programming that we can offer to that community and looking at housing repair options. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister, oral questions. Member for Haverhill South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government and the federal government had no problem rolling out financial support at the start of the pandemic. I expect that the same consideration for those victims impacted by the flooding. The reality is that events like this will quickly deplete one's own financial resources and leave many with nowhere to turn. It's up to this government to fill that gap. Mr. Speaker, I would ask the Minister to confirm if her department is working with the Department of Education and the Department of Finance to look at providing individuals and families with some immediate financial support. And if not, will she commit to reaching out to those ministers and coming up with a support program? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Haverhill South. Minister responsible for MACA.
Mr. Speaker, the department is working very closely with both leaderships in each of the communities. And also, I just wanted to go back to the first question, is that I forgot to mention that we do have evacuees that are still housed in Fort Providence that are from Jean Marie River until we're able to further look at renovations and improving their housing situation there in the community. Also, we still have evacuees at Kelly Lake as well too, and looking at further accommodations for them. Also looking at the local hotels in Fort Simpson as well too that we do have, but financial support that is being offered to the community membership, I will have to get back to the member right now. Right now the department is very concentrated on the repairing of the units so we can have people return to their homes comfortably. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Haverhill South.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our government is touting the Disaster Assistance Program, which is not all that it appears to be. It has severe limitations with respect to the amount of compensation for damages. It is really a payer of last resort. It is not clear on how payments or reimbursements are to be made. There's no timeline for the payment or reimbursement, and all this can be confusing to someone who is traumatized and just looking to survive. Mr. Speaker, can the Minister commit to employing and making program navigators accessible to those affected by the flooding? There will be many questions going forward on the process of assessments, compensation, temporary accommodation, temporary financial support, and some will need assistance in completing forms as well. And I would recommend that navigators be someone from the community and that the people are comfortable with. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Haverhill South. Minister responsible for MACA.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for that question because we're actually working on that right now as well and looking at, how can we further have that outreach to the affected residents in the flood risk communities. And just currently right now we have Fort Good Hope who has been affected as well, and we're waiting on to see what this is going to look like in the Beaufort Delta. So the navigator positions, we are looking at that, and hopefully the next little bit we'll be able to return back to members with a positive response. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary. Member for Haverhill South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with respect to the flooding victims, Michael McLeod, our MP for the N.W.T, was quoted as saying, "People can count on the federal government, that they will be there to help, and they will be there to help right to the end." I will hold our Member of Parliament and the federal government to that promise. Mr. Speaker, can the Minister confirm what ongoing conversations are taking place between her department and the federal government, and do those conversations include immediate financial support to flood victims? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Hay River South. Minister responsible for MACA.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also want to commend to the MP, Mr. MacLeod, for reaching out and for working with us so strongly as well, and leading our connections to the federal government and looking at the urgency for the Northwest Territories as well, and looking at the flood-affected communities. We do have a whole of a government approach that we do continue those conversations with the federal government, and in that we are looking at the disaster application and what details are required. But not only that, as a minister responsible, I'm looking at what can we provide right now, and those financial outreaches as well too. But right now I don't have an update to provide to the member, but we are working at that internally. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Mumford.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Speaker, I made a statement earlier regarding the elections in my region. It will happen on June 14, but I want to ask the minister before the elections. Whenever there's election, there's a lot of complaints that comes out regarding the regulations. I'm hoping for a smooth election and encourage the communities to work with each other and respect the final decision. But as in the past 4 years, we witnessed election and the commotion we had in the communities.
About election in my region, four communities, Clinton region, slated for June 14th. With every election, not just my communities, but other communities as well, there's always criticism, whether it be breaking bylaws, nepotism, whether it be all these different accusations that happens every election. And I have a question for Minister Maca. It could be just one question depending on her answer, if it's yes or no. But if there could be a dedicated MACA representative that's involved with elections on an annual basis or on an election basis. So I'd like to get a confirmation from Minister if she's willing and also dedicating, I guess, MACA representative to be at the final count, June 14th, in all 4 communities, Mr. Speaker. That's my first question. Merci.
Thank you, Member for Mumford. Minister responsible for Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At our last sitting, I did make an announcement, and I did acknowledge that all the elections that were happening throughout the territory, we have quite a bit that are happening within our municipalities. But I do hear the members' concern about, when the election is happening and the situations that may occur from that as well. I will follow up with the member and looking at how can we further accommodate those elections, and should we need a person to be in there to help support those communities. I will continue the conversation with the member. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Mumford.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I didn't get a commitment there. Yes or no. Mr. Speaker, this is a very important matter. It's a 100th year anniversary of Treaty 11, and this is a milestone. And everybody's watching us, not just the Clinton region, but surrounding communities. And it's very important that we have somebody that can oversee the election, a non-biased person from outside the community, to just oversee the count and to witness it and to sign off that it was a fair process. That's all I'm asking for. And I think if Minister can commit to potentially committing to that, I think it will be more concise and clear election process, smoother process. That's what we want to see. And we try and avoid from last 4 years of criticism that happened, and I think it can be avoided, Mr. Speaker. Those are some of the questions that I have for the Minister.
Thank you. Member for Mumfwee, Minister responsible for MACA.
Mr. Speaker, I was wanting to follow up with the member just on further details on the election and looking at the whole environment, I guess, that and the dynamic of how this plays out in his riding. But yes, I will commit to having a person work with the member. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Inuvik Twin Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, like I said, the emergency warming shelter in Inuvik is vital to our homeless residents. You know, in my opinion, it's saved many lives over the years. This government has put millions into COVID restrictions to save lives. When are we going to do that the same for addictions and homelessness? Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the minister in Inuvik, is her department continuing to help to ensure that the homeless in Inuvik are being looked after if there's things for them in place? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Inuvik Twin Lakes. Minister responsible for homelessness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This was this was brought to my attention in the spring. I mean, I want to say in February, March, that the Inuvik warming shelter, we were experiencing some in-house challenges, I guess, with the management and with the board. The Housing Corporation did come into the community to try to alleviate that. The Housing Corporation did hire a manager to work with the board members and try to alleviate the conflict that was happening amongst the board and looking at the status of the Inuvik warming shelter. I'm committed as a minister to visit that again as well, and I do understand that homelessness is a huge issue in our territory. But looking at where we actually do stand, if we do have an active NGO that is able to come and work with us as a corporation and carry out the responsibility, I will have to follow up with the member on the current status. But as we speak right now, that there is still a conflict amongst that NGO. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Inuvik Twin Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This challenge isn't from March or February. This challenge has been ongoing. I raised it in the fall session. They've been struggling. This is a volunteer board of caring people that just keep trying to keep this open. Will the minister, can she commit that this manager or person is somebody who's in Inuvik, and maybe where all of our shelters are, to have somebody directly working in that community from her department in the community of Inuvik to ensure that this board has support? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Inuvik Twin Lakes. Minister responsible for homelessness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Absolutely, like I'm, as a minister and as a department, like we're willing to work with the community. But the last information that I did receive, that there was a decision that was made by the board to temporarily close the homelessness shelter, and the Housing Corporation does fund the Inuvik warming shelter $264,000 annually. But looking at the overnight operations and the conflict that is happening there, I will reach out to the manager that we do have there and see. I want to get a further update on what has the progression been since we have stepped in and tried to work with the nonprofit organization and trying to offer them further supports. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Inuvik Twin Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when we live in a small community, when we live outside of Yellowknife, there's not a lot of people that could do the job as ED. The job is a difficult job in the homeless shelter. And if the person is qualified to do it, a government job comes up, they're gone. This is a position that is vital for ensuring funding is coming in, ensuring that staffing is being taken care of. This manager position, this is where these kind of positions should be put in. We should start looking at this homelessness strategy and having a good plan to have. If we have to start running it as a government, will the minister continue to make sure that this person is on the ground so that this volunteer board, if we even have a board left, will be there and be supported? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Inuvik Twin Lakes. Minister responsible for homelessness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Absolutely. Like, the manager was created because there was conflict in Inuvik with the warming shelter, and looking at the financial situation that they were getting themselves into. I guess that the purpose of this position that was created was to try to work with the board to alleviate those challenges. But we will be working. We will be working with the community as well, because we did end up working with the Indigenous groups in a community. But it's really difficult and it's challenging when we have NGOs that are facing these difficult situations and trying to alleviate them, but also we are there to support them as well too, so we could come together and look at the Inuvik warming shelter and re-establish the board members and also staff as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Inuvik Twin Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In my final supplementary, I just want to know, will the minister commit to making sure that there's something in place for our homeless in Inuvik right now, so that they have a place to wash, so they have a place to use the washroom, where they can try and get a meal? Like, we need to have something for our homeless right now. With this board, we don't even know if they're meeting right now. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Inuvik Twin Lakes. Minister responsible for homelessness.
Speaker, yes, the Housing Corporation is in full support, but we don't have the established board members that are there. We had issues with the staff as well. So, you know, we do fund this this program annually. So if we have shut the doors and we are looking at challenges like that, I'm looking at further training and the support of this manager to help the Inuvik warming shelter to get back and working again. That you know, the position is housed in Inuvik. So I will follow up with the position, see where we are at with the board of directors, where we are at with staff. Have they come to a conclusion? We need to start working with the homelessness, but we can provide the budget that is there for the homelessness, but we need people to run the programming. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. My questions are for the Minister of Environment and Natural Resources. I'm sure he's already been briefed up on the excellent research by Messrs. Palmer and Jameson that proved the overestimation of natural background levels for arsenic in the Yellowknife area and the persistence of mining-related arsenic after more than 60 years. We have an outdated 2003 arsenic remediation guideline that is based on this overestimation of background arsenic. Can the minister tell us what the plans are now to review and update the drastically outdated arsenic remediation guideline? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for that question. I'm happy to tell the House the department is currently reviewing the 2003 environmental guidelines for contaminated sites remediation. This work is being done with new information on remediation criteria from the Canada Council of Ministers of the Environment, as well as new data that has come on arsenic in the Yellowknife area. ENR recognizes that the 2003 guidelines is dated and the updating environmental guidance is standard practice as new data and scientific research is available. This work is nearly completed and will be finalized in the fall of 2021. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the minister for that. Yeah, I raised this in the context of even the Giant Mine environmental assessment, where I wanted the board to look at the remediation guideline, but they declined to do that. This old work that was done leading to the 2003 arsenic remediation guideline, it overestimated background levels by 5 to 10 times. Of course, there's a lot of other research, even the minister mentioned some, that has been done on the toxicology of arsenic since 2003, and much of that points to the need for lower exposure for humans. Will the minister commit to having the human health risk assessment work associated with the N.W.T 2003 arsenic remediation guideline reviewed and updated to be truly protective of human health? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for ENR.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the N.W.T arsenic soil quality guidelines are being developed using the Canada Council of Ministers of Environment Frameworks, which is specific to both health, human health, and the environmental health. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thanks to the Minister for that. I don't think I got a response. I wanted some work done on the human health assessment work that was done back on the 2003 guideline, but I'll pursue that separately with the Minister. Clearly, there's a need to review this arsenic remediation guideline, which currently only includes 2 land uses for residential and industrial use. So in reviewing this guideline, is the Minister committing to expand the land uses that are considered? And then what, of course, are the implications for the giant mine remediation? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for ENR.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, multiple land users are being considered for the N.W.T arsenic soil quality guidelines, and this work is in the process of being finalized. The Giant Mine Remediation Project has approved closure and remediation plans by the Mackenzie Valley Land and Water Board. The criteria used by the projects were not solely based on the N.W.T guidelines. They are site-specific criteria for the giant mine that are confirmed through the Human Health and Ecology Risk Assessment. ENR has also led the development of a human health risk assessment for legacy off-site arsenic in the area surrounding Giant Mine. This work is near completion and the public engagement is planned to begin in June of 2021. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that. I think he answered most of my last question. I don't want to sound alarmist, but in my statement today, I expressed that back in 2003, I had doubts about these remediation standards that were developed by this government. I don't think that it was just a coincidence that residential guideline for arsenic was set marginally above the known measurements of arsenic in soils in the residential built-up areas of Yellowknife. So what assurance can the Minister provide to Yellowknifers that this is still a healthy, great place to live and that our property values are protected? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I again thank the member for these questions. They're very important and they have an impact on the residents of Yellowknife. Updating environmental guidance is a standard practice as new data and increased scientific research is available. I can assure residents of Yellowknife that the previous guidelines completed in 2003 was protective of human health and the environment. ENR will ensure our guidelines continue to be protective of the human health and the environment while incorporating new science and data that becomes available to us. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Thabachal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, since the Department of Finance has just recently begun a new government renewal initiative, would the Minister consider expanding the scope of that initiative to incorporate a renewal within the structure and processes of human resources? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Thabacha. Minister responsible for Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Finance is one of the first 2 departments that will be going through the government renewal process. That process is already underway, it's begun, and as such, Human Resources branch, being part of the Department of Finance, of course, is going to be going through that as well. But Mr. Speaker, that's not the end of what the work that's happening with Human Resources. We also are well underway in having the Indigenous Recruitment Retention Framework actioned and developed, and that will also be providing a further Human Resources tool to all of the government of the Northwest Territories. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Thabacha.
Mr. Speaker, as mentioned earlier, the Department of Human Resources continues to put up roadblocks for people applying to government jobs. Does the Minister acknowledge that there are some existing questionable hiring practices within her department which adversely affects applicants? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Thabacha, Minister responsible for Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Finance Human Resources has quite a wide range of programs that are meant to actually avoid roadblocks and overcome roadblocks. I'd point, for example, to the Indigenous recruitment, well, not to the framework, but to the Gateway program, to the internship program, to the regional recruitment program. There's quite a number of opportunities for people from across the Northwest Territories to become involved. The Department of Human Resources offers counseling in terms of preparing one's resume, of how to prepare for interviews. So quite the opposite, Mr. Speaker. I would say the Department of Human Resources or the Department of Finance is trying to take roadblocks down. And of course, there's always more that can be done department by department to ensure that when the hiring managers are out there, that they're using those tools, that they're aware of those tools, and there is work that happens regularly already with them, and we're going to continue to do that so that they're aware of those tools and using them to their best availability. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Thabacha.
Mr. Speaker, does the Minister recognize that more widespread issues, other than that of the affirmative action, exist within the Department of Human Resources in relation to hiring practices? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Thabacha, Minister responsible for Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, Mr. Speaker, affirmative action policy is obviously one aspect of what goes on during the course of a hiring practice. It's a very important one. But with respect to more widespread issues, again, Mr. Speaker, the Department of Human Resources supports all of the departments of the Government of the Northwest Territories. All of the departments of the Government of the Northwest Territories have a role to play here. And indeed, earlier in the member statement, I heard describing of a hiring culture and of a hiring structure. Well, again, we've already put out the Living Well Together training module to help improve the hiring culture. It's mandatory for all staff across the N.W.T. And as far as the hiring structure, again, as I've mentioned, there's quite a number of programs, and the Recruitment and Retention Framework program is underway in its development right now. So as far as making ourselves even better, that is certainly our goal, and I believe we are going to be attaining it on both the culture front and as well as on the structure front. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary. Member for Thabacha.
Mr. Speaker, would the Minister commit to creating departmental changes to ensure that Deputy Ministers, Assistant Deputy Ministers are provided ministerial direction to follow policies that are neutral, professional, and that all competitions are open to equivalencies, and the job competitions are not arbitrarily closed for no reason, and ensure that the best candidate for the job is hired? No friends of friends, or family friends, or acquaintances hiring each other anymore. Does the Minister agree with that? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Thabacha, Minister responsible for Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am also on the special committee. I also heard the recommendations that were put to us just last week with respect to the fact that governments have to ensure that direction comes from the very top. So I appreciate the fact that the member routinely gives the opportunity for us, all of us in this room as elected leadership, but particularly for me as the minister, have the opportunity to speak here in the House and speak to the public service to say that this is the vision of what we have for an inclusive public servants, to have a diverse public service, and that none of us should be reaching in and hiring friends and acting in a way anything other than transparent and open and in a process that is fair. So that Mr. Speaker, I certainly appreciate that routine opportunity. Specifically, education and experience equivalencies, I would note, come before a competition actually goes out, before candidates are screened. And so, in fact, that is a process that, while I can look at it, is already a process that's not meant to happen at the back end. It happens at the front end. And Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue to refine those processes through all the tools that I've mentioned already today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Decho.
Mr. Speaker. I'd like to first thank the N.W.T. Housing Corporation for the units that are going into my community this year. It's very much appreciated. Mr. Speaker, my member statement expressed concerns with the lack of consultations with the communities by the Housing Corporation. My question to the Minister is, why is there no consultations with the communities, especially the local housing organizations, Board of Directors? Merci.
Thank you, Member for Detroit. Minister responsible for Northwest Territories Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The commitment for the Housing Corporation is to making sure that, we do work with the Indigenous groups and the specific communities, but acknowledgement letters were sent out to the First Nations. I'm not too sure how to pronounce it. Gagoti First Nations? Yeah, and the Fort Providence Métis Council and the Mayor. They were sent letters April 28th, just acknowledging what type of units are going into their community and having an opportunity for them to respond to us. But as of today, we haven't received a response. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Detroit.
Merci, Mr. Speaker, and merci to the Minister for that. Specifically, I was asking about the local housing organizations Board of Directors, because in speaking with them and even the staff, nobody's ever approached them. They've never heard of anything. I'm aware the original plan was for 2 single duplexes for my community. Now I understand this has changed. Now we'll be constructing a 4-plex. That change in plans could delay construction as new plans have to be drawn up. Is the Minister aware of these changes and the need for new design plans? Merci.
Thank you, Member for Detroit. Minister responsible for housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just also want to go back to the original question, the question of the information provided to the local housing authorities. I will follow up on that, and I will follow up with the member that should have they been consulted, that they should have been working very closely with the district office. But the community is going to be receiving a stick-built 4-plex, and looking at the design has already been completed, but constructing stick-built in the smaller communities creates employment, and I'm really big on employment, and that was the opportunity for the community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Detroit.
Merci, Mr. Speaker, and merci to the Minister for that and and her willingness to follow up with the LHO. She mentioned stick-built, but I was hearing otherwise. There was talk that these units would be with sandwich panel construction, with the panels being built by a Yellowknife company. Has there been a cost-benefit analysis or cost comparison to determine if this method has significant savings versus stick-built construction? Merci.
Thank you, Member for Detroit. Minister responsible for housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Actually, with going with the stick-built is a lot more expensive than putting the panelized and the modular homes on the ground. But the opportunity that I wanted to explore was creating employment for the Northwest Territories through the delivery of the 60 units that we are working with the Co-Investment Fund. 40 of them are modular and 20 of them are stick-built. And the opportunity, once again, is to create employment in the smaller communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary. Member for Detroit.
Mr. Speaker, and merci to the Minister for that. I'm glad that she's understanding construction and creating employment in the communities. It's good. The flavor of this government is about energy savings to help combat greenhouse gas emissions by incorporating biomass boiler systems. Will this new building be incorporating wood pellet boiler system? Merci.
Thank you, Member for Detroit. Minister responsible for housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would have to get back to the member for that further detail. I'm not sure if we have pellet boiler material available in his riding. I'm not too sure about that, so I'd have to reach out to the member. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my questions are for the Minister of ITI. The earlier GRIT funding for tourism operators was a much-needed, if somewhat delayed, relief for our tourism sector. This relief, which includes money from CanNor, has not been renewed for the upcoming year. With the easing of the restrictions delayed, it is apparent that we will not see a viable tourism sector this year. Will the minister commit to providing a phase 2 of the GRIT funding or something similar for the upcoming year? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave. Minister responsible for industry, tourism and investment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, no, the GRIT program isn't being renewed, but the good news is that a lot of work has gone into identifying what can be rolled out. As we've been saying, I think since early on, the role of the government of the Northwest Territories is to complement and to help fill gaps when federal partners are not providing certain resources or have maximized what they are able to provide. And in this case, certainly have been waiting to see what can or would make available through or directly to tourism or hospitality. As it is now, of course, I can say that we do have more coming. We have more coming, I hope, this session. Certainly the process of the consensus government model is one wherein we'll have to go through the necessary processes here in the House, but I think there will be good news in the course of this session. I know I've had a lot of conversations and connections from other members, and everyone in this House is recognizing the need to support initiatives for tourism. And again, that work has been underway with ITI and the Department of Finance for some time. And also I would just last note that the industry partners, N.W.T Tourism, we're also certainly doing our best to keep them aware so that they can start to signal to their operators that they're far from forgotten, that in fact quite the opposite. A lot of work has gone into making sure we're ready to support them for this fiscal. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I don't need to remind the minister that she definitely has to be very vocal at her federal tables to ensure that they recognize the time frames in the north and our very, very short seasons. On to my next question. Insurance is very expensive in the north, and with the economic downturn from COVID, rates are only increasing. For example, a remote lodge could have an insurance bill of $12,000 for this year with no revenue coming in. Will the Department of ITI grant a temporary waiver on the insurance requirement in the Tourism Act if a business is operating at reduced capacity? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave. Minister responsible for ITI.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the insurance waiver wasn't intended to be a one-year initiative. However, it was focused on those who aren't making offerings to the public. So there certainly are going to continue to be a requirement for some regulatory oversight and some insurance oversight for tourism operators when they are offering their services to the public. That said, Mr. Speaker, there are, as I've said, programs that are imminently, I hope, going to be rolling out, other programs that I expect that are already available through various other funding pots, whether through ours or through Canor. And if there are operators that are still struggling who are hoping to get back open this season, but that I would encourage them to directly reach out to ITI, and we'll do our best to help and navigate what programs are available to support the insurance and their insurance costs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased with that response. I just urge the minister to encourage her department to actually proactively reach out to some people because they don't always know that they should come and ask for help. One of the biggest complaints we hear from small businesses is the amount of hoops that they have to jump through to access funding and government programs, something that was really a problem even before COVID. Can the minister explain how the work of the Red Tape Reduction Working Group is reducing the burden on small business and in particular for artists and tourism businesses? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave. Minister responsible for ITI.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this involves more than one department, including the Department of Finance. And my primary message, Mr. Speaker, please, if anyone out there has a specific example of red tape that is impacting on a small or medium-sized business, please send that example to redtape@gov.nt.ca. And because, shockingly, we haven't received as many responses as we would have hoped. So that while the Red Tape Committee is focused on, again, small, medium-sized businesses, at this point I would say just send the examples that you have, because I hear it too. I hear the sense that there's too many hoops, there's too many hurdles, there's too many paperworks, but we need to know what the paperwork is. We need to know what the disconnects are, and we need to understand them. I can come up, I've tried to come up with a few, the department's trying to come up with a few. There's a working group composed of industry members, but again, please, by all means, I would encourage everyone out there to send those stories in. There is a structure that's now been set up with the working group. There's a structure within government that the departments have to respond to the working group when they've raised an issue. So there is that structure there, but we will do better when we have more. The one example I can give, though, is that recently, on the theme of the member's question, is that indeed we have worked with MACA, ITI has worked with MACA with respect to remote tourism lodge owners and some of the hurdles and hoops that they had been complaining of for some time, and that as a joint department initiative, we were able to work those things through, and I believe, I understand from the businesses in a way that is going to be functional for them, and a lot less red tape. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It sounds like there's a lot of red tape around the red tape reduction working group. So again, I just want to put back to remind the minister, which I know she's aware of, that it is really hard to always, or it seems that the burden is often put on constituents and residents to come forward, to complain, to identify the problems. And during COVID, I think that's just a lot more difficult for people to be doing. So I will continue to encourage people now that I know which email address to send it to. My last question is around the Detroit region and the flooding. What is the Department of ITI going to do to specifically help those businesses in the Detroit region that are affected by the flooding to first survive and then rebuild their businesses? Thank you.
Thank you, member for Great Slave. Minister responsible for ITI.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, right now, ITI's staff in the region, not only are they, of course, themselves, no doubt, suffering and experiencing directly the impacts of the floods, but I know that they have been involved in the front lines of helping with the efforts to really just provide immediate necessities and having immediate needs addressed. So, a chorus of thank yous should emanate from me as well to the ITI staff there, who I know are working very hard on that front line. With respect to what's going to come next, Mr. Speaker, we've been doing a lot of relief and recovery effort in the last year and a half now. That will continue, whether in the context of the pandemic or whether in the context of the floods. Already I know of at least one example of where ITI staff from another region were able to ensure that programs and services and the needs of businesses were being met in a timely way because they could step in even when the ITI folks in the region were unable to. That will certainly continue, so there will not be any delays, which is important, of course, applying for programs that may be of a federal nature. I mentioned also, I should mention BDIC, which has also been over the last year saying to really take a client service approach. They contacted every single client that had outstanding loans to see if people needed to renegotiate things as a result of COVID. And again, I think that philosophy that we've seen will continue in the next year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Kamloops.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my questions are for the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Education, culture and employment's income assistance policies not only play a key role in caring for Northerners, but they also play a key role in housing Northerners. So I'm wondering if the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment will remove the requirement that N.W.T. income assistance applicants must add their names to the N.W.T. Housing Corporation housing waitlist, public housing waitlist. Thank you.
Thank you, member for Kamloops. Minister responsible for Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Maybe. When I came into this role as an MLA previously, I received a lot of income assistance questions and concerns from my constituents. And so I know there's areas that can be improved, and that's why we've initiated a review of the income assistance program. And through that review, this is one of those areas that we're looking at. I have to say that the member is correct that housing it's a government-wide issue, and for our part at ECE, we do provide housing in a sense where we will provide rental support to individuals who can't afford it, essentially, who are down on their luck, who are having a rough time. And these individuals have to use all of their own financial means first. And one of those things available to them is the social subsidized housing through the Housing Corporation. And the reason that that is currently a requirement is cost, essentially. Over the past 3 years, shelter benefits have been provided to around 2,000 income assistance applicants in the territory to the tune of about $7 million. Of that, 40% of those individuals were in market rental units. However, that accounts for about 90% of the cost. The 60% who have been in public housing account for about 11% of the cost. So it would be a great cost to ECE to provide that benefit. However, someone's paying that cost of the public housing. And so the money is being spent by the government. And so is there a way that we can make things more efficient, reduce the burden on people, reduce the burden on administration? And if one of those ways is by rejigging how we provide housing and who provides housing, then we want to do that. So I don't have a firm yes now, but I want to have a policy that makes sense by the time this assembly is over. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Kamloops.
Mr. Speaker, I think I'd like to report something to the Red Tape Working Group. Right now, and I understand what the minister is saying, and I appreciate that they're doing a review on the income assistance policies. It's very much needed, but hanging on to a piece of a policy throughout a review that really isn't serving the people of the Northwest Territories just doesn't make sense to me. We have over 900 people on our wait list right now, and not all of those 900 people need public housing. For somebody to have to walk down the block in Yellowknife, it's about a 6-block trek for somebody to make another trip down the street to go fill out another form before they can then come back and say, okay, I did that part of it, and since they have no housing for me because our housing stock has not changed in decades, can I now please get the income assistance accommodation rent through ECE? And so the wait list absolutely does not serve us at all. So while I appreciate that ECE is doing a review of the income assistance policies, I'm wondering if the minister will commit to removing this portion of the policy that absolutely does not serve Northerners or the pocketbooks of the Northwest Territories. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Kamloops. Minister responsible for EC&E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and no, I can't because of that money issue that I mentioned, whereby we spend millions and millions of dollars on market housing compared to hundreds of thousands of dollars on the public housing. And right now, that's just the fact of it. That's just the budgets. And this Assembly is the one that appropriates money, and we would have to come back for a large appropriation if this was the case. And so I can't commit to spending millions of dollars that, frankly, we don't have at this moment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Kamloops.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I guess I just disagree with the minister on this one because we don't have enough public housing stock in order to put people in. So whether or not we're pretending we don't want to spend it because we want to put people into public housing, we don't have the public housing units. And so whether or not we want to spend it, we're still spending that money. We're just creating red tape in the process of spending it. My next question for the minister, though, is private sector nonprofits and Indigenous housing providers want to work with the government to create secure housing options for Northerners through longer-term lease and program agreements. Access to ECE's accommodation allowance is only available on a month-to-month basis, creating uncertain tenure for landlords and residents. So will the minister work with these stakeholders to increase housing allowance flexibility and create certainty through lease agreements with Northern landlords? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Kamloops. Minister responsible for EC&E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. ECE doesn't have lease agreements with landlords month to month. ECE provides benefits to individuals, and those individuals can then pay their rent with that funding. What the member is talking about is more what the Housing Corporation does. It provides housing. That being said, there are clients who are payrolled, meaning they don't have to report their income month to month, so they are getting income for 3 months straight without being cut off, if that's the case, with 6 months, maybe a year. And so there are situations like that, and since the pandemic, I've given direction to be much more liberal with payrolling so that we have more individuals like that. But again, I recognize the issue here, and this is one of the reasons we are doing this review, which will be completed and implemented by the end of this Assembly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Final supplementary. Member for Kamloops.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a lot of the work that we're discussing as wanting to put forward from the Standing Committee on Social Development has to do with being able to change policies so that we can see real change in housing in the Northwest Territories. Some of those policies are in the Housing Corporation, but some of them are in the Department of Education, Culture and Employment. Some of them are in finance. And so I'm wondering, based on the timeline that the minister just gave us as the end of the Assembly, if the minister is willing to work with Standing Committee and with regular members to change some of those policies that really don't make sense before the end of the review. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Cam Lake. Minister responsible for EC&E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm always happy to work with the standing committees, but to make changes in the midst of a review, it kind of defeats the purpose. What are you reviewing? If the program isn't the program that you're reviewing, then what do you do with those results? So I'm happy to work with the standing committee, but we have a process in place. And I also want to say that the member mentions a number of different departments. And one of the things that we're also working on is an integrated service delivery model that really looks at the needs of the individuals and not the needs of government. And Housing Department or Housing Corporation is working with Education, Culture, and Employment, is working with Justice, is working with Health to begin developing programs and policies that make sense. And I think that is really the key to a lot of these issues, because we see these individual problems that would be solved if we actually developed the policies in the first place with the clients in mind. So that's the direction we're moving in. And I just want to make sure that everyone's aware of that, because that is one of the, I believe, going to be one of the key initiatives of not just this government, but the future of government in the Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm hoping this is the last time I have to ask this question. When will the Emerge Stronger plan be complete?
When? Excuse me. Thank you, Member for Yellowknife North. Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I'd like to say the Emerging Stronger package would be done now, and it could have been done 2 months ago and put out there if I was going to take 100% control. And that would not be appropriate. We've talked about partnerships. So I do know that people are waiting for it. I want to say that on March 26th, quite a while ago actually, we presented the draft of the Emerging Stronger to the Accountability and Oversight Committee. So I'm hoping that all members had seen that draft at that time. We got a response back, and a revised document was sent to Accountability and Oversight on May 11th. If you don't have a copy, let me know and I'll get it back again to you. After that process was done, that we worked with regular MLAs on what they wanted to see in it, then we worked with the Indigenous governments, because those are critical partners. So we provided all of the document to the Indigenous governments, and we just closed the feedback on that on last Tuesday. This week we've been providing it to the Association of Communities for Municipal Government input and the Business Advisory Council, and their impact is being incorporated. We will be, as I said in my sessional statement, tabling a draft in this session within these 7 days, and it will still be open for public. It'll still be open for feedback. This is going to have to be a living document. We don't know when this is coming, so this will always be changed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Premier. Oral questions. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess my other concern is that we have a number of different documents that speak to different areas of the economy. We have film strategies, art strategies, agricultural strategies, mineral resource strategies. We have a number of different documents, and I know there are many areas that the government is working on. So to me, I view this Emerge Stronger plan as really new items, things that we are doing that we are not already done. But in order to do that, it really comes down to money, Mr. Speaker. There's no point of creating another plan without some special funding towards it. So my question for the Premier is, when we release the Emerge Stronger plan, will there be funding associated with it? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife North. Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the member is aware, in seeing the draft document, that some of the things absolutely have budget lines to them. There's some things that are in our priorities. Universal childcare, we never had that before. Those things are in our priorities already. Those things have action plans. They have things attached. Some of them, Mr. Speaker, will not have budgets attached to them at that time. They will have to go through the process that we all go through, the mains and the infrastructure, the capital. So until those processes are done, you won't see. But, Mr. Speaker, not everything takes money. And some money is not going to be ours. Just because we have to go through processes does not mean that I won't stop lobbying for support from the federal government. Like I said, the federal government, their budget aligns quite well with what our needs are. And we've worked hard over this last year and a half to build strong relationships with the federal government, and that work has paid off in seeing what is in the budget. So we will continue to have strong relationships and strong talks with the federal government to get as much support as we can. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Premier. Oral questions, member for Yellowknife North. Oral questions, member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Sorry I didn't give the Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs a heads up, but I've received a number of calls, emails about the briefing that we had on flooding, and I wanted to take this opportunity to follow up on some concerns that have been raised with me. First off, I've heard a number of concerns around how the assessment of damages is being done or could be done, and can the Minister tell us whether communities have the ability to hire their own, or a First Nation would have the ability to hire their own assessors, get the work done, and seek reimbursement? Must see, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. MACA has hired an assessor that will be starting early next week. So we'll be going into Jean Marie and we'll be going into Fort Simpson. They will be working in collaboration with the leadership in those specific communities. And also this is a team that has been hired. It's not an individual, and they are northern based. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, member for Frame Lake.
Monsieur le Président, I don't think I got an answer to my question. Great to hear that there's going to be a N.W.T team that goes and does this. Do community governments, Indigenous governments, have the ability to hire their own experts, some of their own staff, or staff that they already have in place, do the work, and then seek reimbursement from our government to move this along more quickly? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for MACA.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't have that level of detail, but we will be working directly with those affected communities in order for us to making sure that we submit this disaster application correctly to the federal government, but also recognizing that we do have communities north of the Mackenzie River as well too that we're looking at if they do suffer the amount of significant damage as well too due to the flooding season. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. I know it's question period and I don't have to necessarily get answers, but I still don't have an answer to that question. So I'll give the Minister the opportunity when she answers my next question to say that she'll actually respond to the first one I asked. But Mr. Speaker, I've had some concerns raised with me about the qualifications, perhaps some of the work that might have been done by some folks that may be doing some of the assessment. Do homeowners have the ability to seek a second opinion, or if they disagree with the assessment, what is the process for resolving such a dispute? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is quite the level of detail that I don't have with me right now, and I just want to reassure that the department is trying to work very strategically with the affected communities, and looking at just going back to the question of if the communities can hire their own assessor, if MACA or the government would reimburse. I don't have that level of detail. We haven't submitted a disaster application yet, and our conversation with the federal government is ongoing. But then also looking at whether we would be able to offer this type of assistance. I don't have that level of information right now. MACA and housing are currently in the affected communities. They should be returning today back into Yellowknife, and then we are going to be traveling into Fort Good Hope as well to making sure that when we submit this application, if there is further support in the smaller communities, how can we work effectively together in making sure that we do have the submission. I know this is a long answer, but the other thing is that we're looking at positions to uphold this responsibility and making sure that we work very effectively at the ground level, receiving the information. How do we distribute the money? How do we reimburse the individuals? I don't have that level of detail, but those are questions that we are working on as well within the department. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that. I really do hope that she gets back to us in the House about these questions soon and makes that kind of information available to the public, because as a Yellowknife MLA, I'm getting questions about this now. So my last question, though, on this topic, Mr. Speaker, unless maybe I put up my hand for a third round, is the cost of construction materials is escalating exponentially right now. A sheet of plywood has gone up at least 3 times in value. What is our government doing now to pre-position or secure construction materials now while we can actually still get them, to help make sure that the work that's done for these homeowners gets done this summer? Minister's promised, sorry, I'm not allowed to point, the minister has promised that she's going to have everybody in their homes by this winter. What is our government doing to secure construction materials now to make sure that that work can actually get done? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Thank you, member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for municipal and community affairs.
Mr. Speaker, but with my other hat as Minister responsible for the Housing Corporation, this is why I do have staff at the ground level. I need our department to conduct their own assessment. I need to look at the level of damages that are existing in the community, how many houses have been affected, so we could put in that order for the material that is required to rebuild those units and get more of I guess, more resources happening at the ground level to work with the communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Colleagues, our time for oral questions has expired. Written questions. Returns to written questions. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a return to written question number 26192, asked by the member for Frame Lake on March 29th, 2021, regarding supporting community governments. Mr. Speaker, I have a return to written question number 27-192, asked by the member for Frame Lake on March 30th, 2021, regarding the Slave Geological Province corridor. Mr. Speaker, I have a return to written question number 28-192, asked by the member for Frame Lake on March 30th, 2021, regarding the Tolson Hydroelectric Expansion Project. Mr. Speaker, I have a return to written question number 29-192, asked by the member for Cam Lake on March 31st, 2021, regarding vacancy rates in housing programs.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Returns to written questions. Replies to Commissioner's address. Petitions. Reports of committees on the review of bills. Reports of standing and special committees. Tabling of documents. Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following 3 documents. Respond to Petition 1-19(2), returning Fort Smith Regional Airport runway to former specifications. Follow-up letter for oral questions 697-19(2), road construction economic benefits. And further to my return to written questions 27-19(2), I wish to table the following document, Slave Geological Province Corridor Class D costs estimates. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Tabling of documents. Minister responsible for finance.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following 6 documents. Follow-up letter for oral question 494-19(2), economic recovery. Follow-up letter for oral question 505-19(2), home insurance. Follow-up letter for oral question 592-19, bracket 2, development of the Northwest Territories remediation economy. Follow-up letter for oral question 616-19, bracket 2, government of the Northwest Territories open government portal. Follow-up letter for oral question 671-19, bracket 2, public service supporting northern businesses, and follow-up letter for oral question 699-19, bracket 2, northern students recruitment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Minister responsible for Northwest Territories Housing Corporation.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following 7 documents. Follow-up letter for oral questions 635-19, bracket 2, housing in Hay River. Follow-up letter for oral questions 643-19, bracket 2, aging housing units in N.W.T. Follow-up letter for oral questions 651-19, bracket 2, retrofits on high-rise in Hay River. Follow-up questions 653-19, bracket 2, new housing units in Inuvik. Follow-up letter for oral questions 655-19, bracket 2, biomass heating and energy efficiency for the Northwest Territories Housing Corporation. Follow-up letter for oral questions 656-19, bracket 2, seniors housing needs. And further to my return to written questions, 29-19, bracket 2, I wish to table the following. Northwest Territories Housing Corporation Unit Status Report Summary, March 31st, 2021. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to table the following 4 documents. Follow-up letter for oral question 498-19, brackets 2, culturally sensitive healthcare services. Follow-up letter for oral question 564-19-2 and oral question 673-19-2, extended and long-term care in Hay River and extended care beds. Follow-up letter for oral question 632-19-2, non-insured health benefits and dental services, and follow-up letter for oral question 666-19-2, the 4th trimester. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Notices of motion. Notices of motion. Motions. Motions. Notices of motion for the first reading of bills. Member for Frame Lake.
Monsieur le Président, I give notice that on Monday, May 31st, 2021, I will move that Bill 29, Resource Royalty Information Disclosure Statute Amendment Act, be read for the first time. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Notices of motion for the first reading of bills. Notices of motion for the first reading of bills. First reading of bills. First reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Consideration in Committee of the Whole of Bills and Other Matters. Consideration in Committee of the Whole of Bills and Other Matters. Report of Committee of the Whole. Report of Committee of the Whole. Third reading of bills. Third reading of bills. Madam Clerk, orders of the day.
Orders of the day for Friday, May 28th, 2021 at 10 a.m. Prayer, Minister Statement, Member Statement, returns to oral questions, recognition of visitors in the gallery, acknowledgements, oral questions, return to written questions, replies to the Commissioner's address, petitions, reports of committees on the review of bills, reports of standing and special committees, tabling of documents, notices of motions, notices of motion for first reading of bills, second reading of bills, consideration in Committee of the Whole of bills and other matters, report of Committee of the Whole, third reading of bills, and orders of the day.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. This House stands adjourned until Friday, May 28th, 2021 at 10 a.m.